About 7 years ago, I was involved with a few friends in starting an independent congregation just outside of Boston. As I was thinking about what's the difference between that act of innovative change in the Jewish community and perhaps the way that I grew up or the way that my parents grew up, as I was reflecting on it, I was reminded that my parents actually were involved in, I believe, starting not only one but two synagogues, also in their 20s and 30s, and that going back further, my grandparents themselves were involved in founding and building a number of what turned out to be mainstream and important Jewish institutions, including founding a day school, as well as being part of that generation of Jews. I remember in my grandmother's house the wall of plaques from Israel Bonds. So they were part of that generation of Jews for whom supporting the state of Israel was not an act of supporting the establishment, but was actually very much part of a startup project. And so in some ways, this was a useful reminder to me that although we tend to operate under the assumption that what we're living in, the world we're living in, the pace of change at which we're operating, and the instinct of this generation of Jews to be involved with systemic change may not actually be all that new. And that Judaism, Jewish institutions, Jewish leadership and change are constantly happening. And what's more, that even though we experience a tremendous amount of resistance in what you call the established Jewish community or the mainstream Jewish community towards this pace of change, that too itself is not a particularly new phenomenon. You put it in historical comparison to the battles between Hasidim and Mitnagdim, or even if you put it in the framework of the very language of the word Orthodox as a response to the birth of Reform, there's no doubt that both the pace of change and the vociferousness of response to change have both been very severe throughout Jewish history and tradition. And so the question is, what's different about today? And it's possible that first, we actually may see that the pace of change is in some way different, both because we know about more change as it takes place throughout the Jewish world, given all of the technology that we have, and given the access to new opportunities that the breakdown of traditional structures of community enables us to see. But I think the other piece is that there are increasingly no boundaries around the possibilities that are possible for Jewish identity and innovation, a completely shrunken or disappearing barrier between human initiative and creativity and the articulation of a form of Jewish identity that reflects that idiosyncrasy. Whether it's through organizations like ROI or Present Tense, there are so many more platforms for young Jews in particular to be able to say, I don't fit in Xbox. This is the idea I want to create. I will both find a couple of people who agree with this. I'll find access to sources of funds to be able to do it. And so the vacuum or the gap between an idea and its implementation and new forms of Jewish identity is just shrinking so dramatically. To me, and this I share with you, Jay, your optimism about this, what it means is that there is a treasure trove opening up about what it means to be Jewish today. And at the moment that we're living in is no longer about belonging, replicating, or even starting new Jewish initiatives that seem similar to the ones that we grew up with, our parents started, or our grandparents started, but rather there's an opportunity for a total articulation of an idiosyncratic personal Jewish identity. And you can probably find at least two other people in the Jewish world who like that idea and will help you look for money to support it. For all of the anxiety about the Jewish future, and there is an enormous amount out there, it seems to be the kind of common pastime of what it means to be an involved and affiliated Jew is to be nervous. I think the realities of the shifting nature of Jewish identity are reflective of the gifts of modernity, the openness of an outside world for Jews to belong and to participate in it in ways that would have been wildly unprecedented in every previous generation. All of these fears about assimilation, loss, difference, and change are, I think we have to call gutitzaros. They're good problems. They are contexts born out of a success story, particularly for the North American Jewish community, that would really be unprecedented. And in particular, the ways that these modes of identity and affiliation are giving voice to voiceless Jews beforehand and creating context by which to build community around what seemed maybe in the past to have been completely idiosyncratic or individual ideas is really quite extraordinary. At the same time, it comes with a liability, and here's where I want to push back a little bit. The liability that in order to create a Jewish community in which we value and cherish this idiosyncratic Jewish identity and the transformative ways in which my ideas, even though they may not be part of the mainstream Jewish community already, can still help me build community, is that I fear sometimes that we risk a loss of the sense of the core, in the valuable, meaningful sense of the core foundational instincts or values of what it means to be Jewish, in replacing that with the kind of personal Jewish identity, I-spirituality, to use your word, Jay, taken to an extreme. To this end, I just wanted to share two old/new Jewish ideas from the early 20th century Jewish philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, who wrote an article in the 1920s called Towards the Renaissance of Jewish Learning that is starting to actually be implemented. It's a kind of vision for the Jewish future from one of our modern Jewish prophets that sets up a template for us in the present that might be useful and also might be challenging. In the essay, Rosenzweig shares two Jewish ideas. One, he says that the urgent need of the present moment is not more Jewish books, and it's not more Jewish programs and more Jewish institutions, that the urgent need of the present moment is more Jewish human beings. And he says, cleansing it of the partisan associations of the word. It's not Jewish human beings as opposed to other human beings, but it's actually about the deep humanization of what it means to be Jewish, that we are not merely people who belong to particular institutions, we are not merely members of institutions or organizations, but that we allow a Jewishness to suffuse all of what we do, and as a result, we allow our humanity to suffuse everything that comes with being Jewish. That's the positive story that I think is now being told with all of the innovation and creativity in the Jewish world, is the acknowledgement of the deep humanity of what it means to be Jewish and the new possibilities that humanization opens up for the changing Jewish identity. But the other thing that he talks about in this piece is, and he picks up on a quote from a first century Roman philosopher, Terence, who says, "Nothing human is alien to me." And he says that the charge for us is to think nothing Jewish is alien to me. I think part of what happens when we believe in the notion of the total I phenomenon when it comes to Jewishness is that we localize Jewishness entirely around our choices and our needs, and that prevents us from being able to participate in a broader collective conversation about the things that are actually central and important. So as much as I believe in, I participate in, and I belong to this movement in Jewish life to claim new Jewish forms of identity, spirituality, and belonging through the humanization process, through saying, this is who I am in this moment, and I can make Judaism come alive for me, I fear that we are losing that possibility of saying, nothing Jewish then is alien to me. Now, we have a challenge for a kind of pluralism in front of us of saying, even if I make my particular choices of what's important to me Jewishly, and they are different than yours, that I am a participant in your shared collective enterprise, or that we belong to this together. I think the classic example of this is that to my mind, the most famous and most accomplished change agents throughout Jewish history were actually the classical rabbis of antiquity, who came out of a worldview that was collapsing and produced an entirely different worldview. And one of the things that's very extraordinary about the rabbis in that moment was that they were very comfortable using notions of ikarim. Right? Rabbis would say things like, the world stands on three pillars. And I guess the challenge I want to put to us is, can we live both in a time of total innovation, creativity, and I-spirituality, and at the same time figure out what are the core shared pillars of what it means to be Jewish?